Well, it's time to abstain from food and water. At least for me it is. I am about 8 hours, a little shy of 8 hours, into a 9-day dry fast. What does that mean? That means no food, no water, no nothing for 9 days. And when did I start dry fasting? That was when I lived on the holy mountain of Athos, and I met many monks, hundreds of them, who told me that all Orthodox Christians are required by the typicon of the Church to fast from after dinner on the Sunday before Great Lent until they receive the Holy Mysteries on Wednesday in the first week of Great Lent. And the monks who trained me in this at the Great Lavra, or in Greek, Meiste Lavra, they told me we are not fasting like this because we are monks. No. They said we're doing this because we're Christians, and this is what the typicon requires of all Orthodox Christians. Are there monks who fast for much longer than 3 days from food and water? Yes. But I was very impressed by the intensity of these monastics. Now, the typicon says in addition to the first 3 days of Great Lent, from Sunday evening until Wednesday afternoon, roughly 60 to 72 hours, all Orthodox Christians must abstain from food and water. That's what it says. It also says that for Great and Holy Friday, it emphasizes that includes children. So the 24 hours on the Friday before the resurrection of the Lord is celebrated, and then the first 3 days of Great Lent. So, what I was impressed by on the Holy Mountain, well, first of all, I couldn't do it. I could go one day because I was accustomed to going without food and water on Friday before we celebrate the resurrection, Pascha, or Easter. I had never known that it's also required by the typicon during the first 3 days of Great Lent. And they informed me, and of course they're not forcing me. So I did 24 hours, maybe 30 hours, no food, no water on that Monday, and then drank some water on Tuesday, and then was able to receive Holy Communion to break the fast on Wednesday of Great Lent. Now, when I moved away from Mount Athos, I had this dry fasting practice in mind, which I realized was profoundly beneficial. I saw the monks chanting the longest and most difficult services of the entire church year on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Imagine chanting, that means singing, the most beautiful and difficult music that is ever chanted in the church, while not drinking any water and not eating any food. That was heroic and beautiful to witness. And then when the monks go to their cells, they're doing as much prayer with prostrations as they can. And I met men in their 80s and 90s that could do this much more easily than I could as a healthy young man in my 30s. So when I left the Holy Mountain, I thought I must study this total fasting practice, medically known as dry fasting. And I discovered the body of research, medical research, done in Russia during the course of the 20th century. And thanks to clever usage of the internet, I was able to find the woman, the Russian lady, whose father was the physician in the Soviet Union, who was responsible for all of the dry fasting research. You see, the Soviets really did want to cure disease because they figured that, well, a healthy populace is more productive, and they didn't like to spend money. The Soviet state was notoriously cost-sensitive. Well, how much do you think the Soviets calculated that it costed for people to drink no water and eat no food? That cost nothing. They said, well, hello, doctor. You're going to study that for the rest of your life. It's Dr. Shenikov, if you want to know his name. And the lovely Inga Shenekova, his daughter, who looks much younger than her age because she has been practicing dry fasting since after her first period, when she turned 14, according to her father's protocol. And not only is this profoundly beneficial spiritually, it's also curative of whatever ailments concern us, with very few exceptions. There's a book recently published by one Dr. Thomas Siegfried called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. In this book he explains, it's 900 pages, I don't recommend that you read it, but if you want the bottom line, here's what he lets you know if you read this book. If everyone fasted strictly for 3 to 5 days a year, there would be no cancer. Because fasting destroys precancerous cells. Now it does a lot more than that actually, it turns out. Rejuvenates the mitochondria. The body creates its own water. When you fast from food and water, your body has to make its own water. Russian scientists discover that the water your body makes when you abstain from food and water has the properties of holy water and erases negative, painful, and sinful memories. So all of that is remarkable, I'd say. And I learned to dry fast initially from monks and then from people with a medical background. And I'll just share with you Dr. Shenekov's dry fasting protocol. He distinguished that now in the 20th century, and certainly more for us in the 21st century, the world is very polluted. It's polluted with artificial radiation like Wi-Fi networks, power lines, and all kinds of other artificial radiation. It's also polluted by chemicals in our water supply, in our food supply, in the ground, in the atmosphere, which we were never meant to consume. And it's polluted in many other ways as well, including spiritually. So he said that in order to thrive in the world we live in today, he considered dry fasting to be necessary to have ideal health and to thrive. So here's what he recommended. His protocol is as follows. Remember, this is no food, no water during these periods. Every week, minimum 36 hours of dry fasting. Every month, minimum 3 days of dry fasting. Every quarter, a longer one. So 2 of the quarterly fasts, which of course you can train yourself to. You don't have to do this right away if you're interested. And I do train people in this. If you want coaching on how to start dry fasting, I can provide that coaching. Just get in touch with me via contact information in the description. And I have witnessed people be cured of almost every imaginable and unimaginable ailment. I've worked with people who have lost huge amounts of weight. I've seen people lose more than 100 pounds. I've seen them transform spiritually and psychologically. I worked with one gentleman who, and this is true, he lost over 400 pounds. That's real. So lots of miracles are possible via this practice. Back to the quarterlies. So 2 of the quarterly fasts should be 5 days in length, and then 2 of them 7 days in length. Ideally, he said, one of those longer ones should be 9 days. So I'm now in my 9-day total fast, and I also have learned to do this so I can. And it turns out that women who live at home and take care of their kids, in my experience today, are fasting more strictly than monks. One married lady I met in one of my online dry fasting groups has 7 children, and she has dry fasted up to 11 days. That is, no food, no water for 11 days. Now, she had to leave the house and have her husband take the kids for that. But she can do 7 days, no food, no water, while at home with her 7 kids. She even took them camping once. Imagine, mama, 7 kids all under the age of 9. And she abstains from food and water for 7 days effortlessly while camping with the kids. That is an experienced dry faster with tremendously high level of health and energy and joy. So asceticism always gives you, which is to say, asceticism, as I'm using the term, means an athletic endeavor for spiritual purpose, or a spiritual training program which has an athletic nature to it. This kind of training goes back to pre-Christian times, and it includes other religions. For example, in recent times, there are Hindus who dry fast. They have gone much longer, even than 40 days. The Lord did 40 days, no food, no water. St. Moses the prophet in the Old Testament did 40 days, no food, no water. St. Ezra as well. There was a yogi who was studied recently in a hospital in India. He was locked up in a metabolic ward by agreement, and doctors observed him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And he fasted from all food and water for 60 days. So please understand this is possible and well documented. I personally have a friend who lives in San Francisco who went 40 days, no food, no water. I have another friend who has done 21 days, no food, no water. The longest I have personally gone, because I'm a weakling compared to some of my friends, is 9 days and 21 hours, no food, no water. I have a friend who's an Orthodox Christian who regularly does 10 days, no food, no water. So these are, you might think, heroic efforts, but they're not. This is easier than winning the Olympic Games, I assure you. And I have a friend who was on the Olympic team for wrestling. I have another friend who was first alternate to go to the Olympics for wrestling for the United States. So I've met some really elite athletes. That's harder than this. This isn't really that hard, and it has enormous benefits, internally and externally. There was a priest who shared a principle recently that I really liked. He said, if you are capable of a form of asceticism, then you better do it. I thought that was great. So on the holy mountain of Athos, I met a monk in his 80s who had the most beautiful voice that I ever heard on the holy mountain. And he could and did stand in vigil in church for as long as 16 hours without sitting down, without leaving the church once. Now, he can do that, so he does that. You have to do what you can do for Christ's sake, and I've felt strongly called at this time to a 9-day dry fast. My conscience wouldn't let up until I began. So putting this on camera is my way of putting myself on the hook for the full 9 days, which is 216 hours. I've done it before, I've done longer, but it takes an intentionality, it takes a willingness. And I thank you for watching because you're supporting me in doing what I ought to do as I share these fasting experiences with you. Now, side note, towards the end of the fast, sometimes, even maybe normally, when it's a long fast like this, I may lose my voice or lose my voice a bit, but I'll do my best to make a video at least once a day while I am dry fasting. And perhaps even to break the fast or right after I break it, so as to share the experience with you. And when combined with prayer and contemplation according to the instruction of the Holy Fathers, and also when combined with almsgiving, fasting is very, very, very powerful. Now, it's not to say that fasting is meaningful in and of itself, but if we do it for Christ's sake, for love of Jesus Christ and obedience to God, then it is God-pleasing, and it's also necessary if you wish to be saved. What's in the Typicon is the bare minimum of a normative path to salvation. And there are some who may not have the opportunity to have a more heroic version of salvation. For example, not everyone can be beheaded for Christ's sake. Not everyone will be hung for Christ's sake. Not everyone, like Father Roman Braga in the 20th century in Romania, not everyone can be tortured every day, 12 hours a day for 7 years for Christ's sake. Those are extraordinary heroic endeavors. But the Typicon sets a benchmark for what is normative with respect to the true ancient faith. And so 60 to 72 hours, because that's the time our Lord was in the tomb, that's when we abstained from food and water in the beginning of Great Lent. Now, this is completely normal in places where people wish to be saved, like the Holy Mountain. And the monks of the Great Lava were so strict to tell me this. We don't do this because we're monks. We do this because we're Christians. They wanted me not to think of them as spiritual heroes because they could go 3 days with no food and no water. There are monks who have gone much, much longer than that. And that is something of a heroic endeavor. But to do 60 hours, no food, no water, which is usually about the timing, because Sunday evening after dinner, and very often the Vesperal Divine Liturgy on Wednesday is served rather early, which makes it about 60 hours, which is almost exactly the amount of time that the Lord Jesus was in the tomb. And there are cosmic as well as spiritual and physical reasons for that. So I thank you for watching and listening. If you have any interest in learning to dry fast yourself, you may get in touch. I also run a Telegram channel full of almost 200 people who really enjoy and profit from dry fasting and sharing our experiences. So you can join that. It's free. And I pray that God will enlighten you such that you understand that spiritual transformation in an orthodox manner is only possible with the right combination of fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. For we are nous, heart, and body. The body sanctified by fasting, the nous by prayer, and the heart by almsgiving, by works of mercy. And if we do this in obedience to God for love of Christ, then by this means, with the help of divine grace and synergy with our efforts, we can be saved. Grant this, O Lord,